Hey everyone, welcome to the last installment of Scheldt Week here on this day in Canadian military history. Excited to have David Patterson on again for the second time. I don't even remember. He's been on a couple times. He's always in the chat, knows his stuff. I'm sure a lot of you know who he is. So excited to talk about a regiment that doesn't get talked about hardly at all. Because mostly they weren't on the front line a lot. So it's going to be interesting to dig into that and get a little bit of history of them and look at their role in the Leopold Canal attack that we discussed very, very briefly yesterday with Philip. So, well, not briefly, but we kept the details, just the engineers yesterday. So just before we begin, thanks again to the Battlefield Tours and to Sam Cowan for all the support this week and the becoming this week's sponsor. It was great to have that and have support and help the channel keep going. Sponsors are very important to kind of keep this going. So really, really, really thankful for that. Also really thankful for all my patrons and everybody else who supports through the YouTube as channel members. Those are very, very helpful. Just a few bucks a month if you can support is incredibly helpful and helps me keep doing these things, because it might not seem like it, but on some sort of your end on the end product here, but getting all this going, organized, getting the ideas, getting it all, it takes quite a bit of time, and it takes a lot of planning. So any support you can help me do these again. And also, before we just get going, if you have an idea for another theme week, I want to hear it, because I'm kind of stumped on what to do next, and love to hear some ideas. So if you want to leave those in the chat below, if you're watching after, sidebar, wherever, I will check those out in a bit and get some ideas generated and get going from there. So other than that, we're going to get going, and we can get Dave on the screen here. Hey, Dave, thanks for coming on today. I appreciate it, and you closing out Scheldt Week. I appreciate you taking that final spot here.
Well, thanks, Brad. It's great to be here. It's been a great bunch of shows. I've watched them all, and really enjoyed participating in the chat. And yeah, it's been a fantastic week, and I'm happy to close it out with you today.
Yeah, it's great to have definitely a very lesser known part of a pretty well known part, I guess you could say, of this, right? Because Leopold Canal, as you said, gets attention in a lot of ways, but this part, I don't think hardly anybody knows about. I think there's going to be some surprising elements here that a lot of people are not going to know. So we can just launch into it if you like.
Sure thing. All right. So I call this desperate to fight. You know, the headquarters defense company getting into the battle finally at the Leopold Canal. And what I'm going to do today is sort of go to a little bit of the history of the Royal Montreal Regiment and how they end up at the Leopold Canal on the 6th of October in 1944, and talk about their desperate struggle on the banks of the Leopold Canal, which is sort of something that is still talked about. I'm from Montreal. I've lived in the Montreal garrison and know the Royal Montreal Regiment fairly well, despite being a gunner. So I heard these stories and actually met, you'll meet him later on, Captain Schwab, who was the hero at the canal. I met him at mess dinners and that sort of thing. So we've had a fairly close link to the Royal Montreal Regiment, and so that's one of the reasons I've heard this story and followed it, developed it into the presentation today. So here we'll carry on from there. So basically, just a little bit of their history. The thankless task of being a headquarters defense company, and then their bloody baptism, which actually wasn't really their baptism, was their second baptism of fire. So the Royal Montreal Regiment is a CEF. It's created for the First World War. As we know, that Sam Hughes, the Minister of Militia, tossed out the mobilization plans of the Army and decided to form numbered battalions from across the country. And the two numbered battalions from Montreal were the 13th and the 14th. The 13th formed mainly from the Black Watch, and the 14th from three other regiments, but formed on the 14th of August and was deployed overseas by the end of the year with the 1st Division and fought throughout the whole of the First World War. So had a very good reputation as a fighting battalion, as you can see by the cost to them, 1,192 dead out of 6,000 soldiers who went through the regiment, and that's through one battalion during the war. So in the thick of all the battles that we know about in the First World War, from Second Ypres all the way to Valenciennes, or the end of the war.
Yep.
So, and they had two Victoria Cross awarded during the war. The two photos there of the guys who got them. Captain Francis Scrimger, who was their medical officer, who earned his Victoria Cross at Second EAP. It was actually the first Victoria Cross awarded to a Canadian in the Second World War. And then later in 1918, right near the end, April 1918, just before Amiens, when they're still up in the Vimy sector, Lieutenant McKean, who VC, MC, MM, so obviously a very brave soldier who got his VC from a raid. And I'll just read briefly from their citations so you get a feel of what they were doing. So Captain Scrimger, as a medical officer with the 14th Battalion, was in charge of an advanced dressing station at a farmhouse near Veltier on the St. Julien-Ypres Road. The advancing enemy were bombarding the area. German infantry were within sight. Scrimger directed the removal of the wounded under heavy fire. Captain Scrimger and a badly wounded Captain MacDonald were the last men left at the station. Scrimger carried the wounded officer out of the farmhouse to the road. Bombardment of shell forced Springer to stop and place MacDonald on the road. Springer then protected him with his own body. During a lull in the gunfire, Scrimger again carried MacDonald toward help. When he was unable to carry him any further, he remained with the wounded man until help could be obtained. So that was a well-earned first VC of the First World War to a Canadian. And then for McKean, on the 27th, 28th of April at the Gavrelle sector in France, Lieutenant McKean's party was held up at a block in the communication trench by intense fire. He ran into the open, leaped over the block head first on top of one of the enemy. While it's lying there, he was attacked by another with a fixed bayonet. He shot both of these men, captured the position, and then sent back for more bombs. And until they arrived, he engaged the enemy single-handed. He then rushed a second block, killing 2 of the enemy, capturing 4 others, and driving the remainder into a dugout, which he then destroyed. So quite the one-man army was Lieutenant, later Captain McKean. So the RMR, just all that to illustrate, they had a glorious history in the First World War from a military perspective. And that's one of the reasons that they were selected. If you don't know, at the end of the First World War, there was something called the Otter Commission, which decided which battalions of the CEF would be continued on into the army, which would be perpetuated into other units. And so, mainly for this reason of its history, the Royal Montreal Regiment, or the 14th Battalion, was decided to be retained and was given the name of the Royal Montreal Regiment. They actually received their first colors in the field in Germany after the war. A few units that happened to at the end of the war. So they come from a place, a great place of history, a great pride in the unit as it goes into the Second World War. Of course, in the 20s and 30s, the militia and the non-permanent militia and the permanent militia, in other words, the regular army and the reserve army, struggles with massive cuts and budget reductions. The role of militia infantry unit changed and was modified as doctrines and policies changed. Some infantry units were converted to armor. The cavalry regiment becomes the cavalry tanks. The Royal Montreal Regiment was tasked as a machine gun battalion. And machine gun battalions, of course, come out of the First World War as an organization and are retained in the army. And so when the Second World War starts, they are still rolled as a machine gun battalion and are mobilized as such in September 39. They go over with, not with the 1st Division, but with the next contingent, and evolutions of doctrine and what's going on in France. More machine guns are added to actual units, and so the need for this extra machine gun battalion goes away, but armored reconnaissance becomes the flavor of the month, if you like, in the army, and so they become the 32nd Canadian Armored Reconnaissance Regiment, Royal Montreal Regiment, and train in that role from about 1940 till about 1943, when reorganizations once again decide that they're going to be disbanded, actually. So there's a long correspondence in their regimental history between various people back home, the commander of the 2nd Battalion who's back home in the Reserve Army, their honorary colonel, who's Price, who's a well-known Canadian businessman, trying to keep them from being disbanded. And so what ends up happening is they get this role as the 1st Canadian Army Defense Company in April of 1943. And we actually get notice of this happening, and there's the letters from the CO, and most of the other members of the unit are hived off to other recce units, other armored reconnaissance units. So they're divided into 3, sent to various units, and about 150 of them are kept on as this company. So in that role, they then deployed to Northwest Europe in June of 1943. So they do that. And then there's some maps. It's a famous map you can get on Project 44 website. If you want a copy of that map, shows the location of the 1st Canadian Army headquarters through Northwest Europe. This is the version from D-Day till about the end of 1944-45. And the red circle there shows where they end up just before the Leopold Canal again. Then the pictures on the right you see there's General Crerar. Then of course they were protecting him, and that was their role. They had three different elements in the company. They had an anti-aircraft element, an armored car element, and an infantry element to do the various roles of the headquarters platoon. So those Daimler 2 armored cars would escort General Crerar around when he was moving around the battlefield. Although Crerar did like to use an aircraft a lot as well, but they didn't do that job. That was one thing they weren't doing. But they became very familiar, if you like, with what was going on at 1st Canadian Army headquarters. Yeah. So it's a thankless task. No one remembers the headquarters defense companies. The other unit that did a lot of this was the Lawrence Scots.
Yeah.
And the Lawrence Scots, they had platoons in every division and corps headquarters in the Army. So they served all over in Italy and Northwest Europe. And every once in a while, you run into the grave of a Lawrence Scott soldier in a cemetery. People say, who's that? Where did he come from?
Yeah.
Well, that's these headquarters defense platoons. And so the Lawrence Scots had been doing the headquarters defense platoon at the Army headquarters as well. But they bumped it up to a company and gave it to the Armada. So about 140, as I said, infantry, anti-aircraft, armored car platoons to support and defend the headquarters and protect General Crerar on the move. They're trained by the Guards this is in the UK back in 1943, and the Lawrence Scots, who they're taking over from. But they have 6 days to transition into this new role.
Yeah,
so pretty fast.
Yeah, it's really fast.
So they're reorganizing. They're deciding who's going to stay, who's going to go. People volunteer. People who want to go to a more combat-oriented organization, or people who want to stay with the regiment. So it was quite a process of triage, almost, you'd say, to decide who was going to stay. And finally, they end up with a Major Low, 2 captains, and two lieutenants as the officer corps, and then the NCOs and other members of the organization. A little later, they add another platoon that works with this 21st Army Group line of communication. In other words, they're protecting in the rear area, and they have a completely separate history that's recounted in their regimental history as they do that job of traffic control, prisoner control, prisoner war management, if you like. So very different kind of role than you think of from an infantry, your typical infantry battalion in the Canadian Army. So they land in Normandy on the 27th of June with the headquarters. And there's an interesting anecdote in their regimental history, because there's the famous, and many people know about it, the first time the Canadian ensign was raised with the 1st Canadian Army was, Canada Day of 1944, July 1st. And there's pictures of Crerar, and there's even some newsreel of it showing them. But if you're reading the regimental history, it was quite a slapdash affair. Apparently, General Crerar only realized this on the 30th of June, and said, "Okay, organize this for tomorrow, guys. Find a flag. Get your uniforms cleaned, and we'll stand in front of the cameras, and we'll do this." So it wasn't as if it was a hugely staffed and organized event. It was very much slapdash, but it's there as the first time the red ensign is flown as Canada's national flag in the field. And what I'll do here, I have a little clip which I'll try and play here from a Canadian Army newsreel clip. So let me just come out of here for a second.
Here, I'll just switch to this so you get it up. So
Okay.
we don't make anybody nauseous with all the switching around. Just real quick, actually, while you're getting that going. So Andreas asked a question about units having regimental museums. The answer is sometimes. Does the RMR have their own?
Yes, they do in Montreal at their armory. As you might expect, a lot of it focuses on the First World War.
Yeah.
But there is material and stuff from the Second World War. So at the armory in St. Catherine Street in Montreal, they've got. I'm not sure if I have to come out of there. There we go. Go to. There it is. Oops. Sorry. It's.
Yeah. No rush. Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Here we are.
So this is a clip from the Canadian Army newsreel that shows visitors at the headquarters, and it shows a clip of the Royal Montreal Regiment sort of mounting a guard for Prince Bernhard. So you'll see that was a lot of their day-to-day life was doing this, managing the visitors, managing the schedule of the general and all that. So we'll see if hopefully you can hear this as it plays.
World-famous celebrities visit 1st Canadian Army headquarters. Captain the Honourable Anthony Eden, Foreign Secretary of the British Cabinet, is welcomed by General Crerar. Always a favourite in Canada, Anthony Eden renews old acquaintances and forms many new friendships at Army headquarters. Prince Bernhard, Prince Consort of the Netherlands, is in France to inspect Dutch troops under the command of the 1st Canadian Army. He is OC Dutch Forces of the Interior. Before visiting his countrymen, the Prince pays his respects to General Crerar. The Guard of Honor, which will accompany him on his tour, is inspected at Army headquarters.
All right. So we come back here.
There we go.
We're all back.
There we go.
Could you hear that?
Yep, no problem.
Yeah, good. So that's just a sort of typical day in the life, if you like, of the Headquarters Defense Company as visitors come through, and their regimental history sort of reads a bit like a who's who of the Allied forces as people come through and visit General Crerar, or he goes off to visit other people. So it's an interesting little sidelight that, and they quote a lot from their war diary in their history. So it's an interesting little snapshot into 1st Canadian Army headquarters that never really took advantage of before. So, doing all that role and moving up the coast from Normandy to the Netherlands, or actually Belgium at this time, they get to a little town called Deurle in Ghent by about the 8th of September. But then, on the 14th, before that, they get asked or tasked, actually they asked to get involved in the action. And you can see here, if you know the geography of Europe, Calais is a bit further to the south and the west of Ghent. So they actually go back to the battles that are going along on the Channel coast to get into action. So they asked to get into the action somewhere. And so B Company of the Regina Rifles is substituted with them. So they take over their role. And I was telling Brad before, Terry Kopp told me from his many interviews with Regina Rifle soldiers, particularly Gordon Brown, is they were particularly, there was no hesitation about doing this switch. You know, we'll go back to headquarters, or actually in this case they're going forward to Army headquarters, have good food and a hot wash and all that good stuff for a few weeks while you guys take over our job. There was no hesitation in the Regina Rifles to let them in. So Lieutenant Colonel Foster Matheson, who's the CEO of the Reginas, brings them in, and he sort of feeds them in, gives them a little bit of battle inoculation to Cap Grinet, which was mainly done by the 9th Brigade at the end. But in the early stages up near Vissant, if you can see down on the bottom left where that smoke screen was during the Maida battle, was the town of Vissant. Mm-hmm. And the 7th Brigade was up there when they cut off Cap Grinet from supply and from any kind of reinforcement. So 30 troops, 10-person section from each of the was added to each of the Regina companies at that battle. and they got into some action, but not a lot. There was no casualties taken. So oftentimes you hear about the first battles of a unit sort of determine its luck or its reputation in a way.
Right.
You compare the HTPs or the Regina Rifles, indeed, with like the Essex Scottish in terms of they get a reputation as a lucky battalion, and sometimes that's down to what do they get as a draw for their first battle. Essex Scottish gets Dieppe as the first battle, whereas the Regina Rifles get to do D-Day and D+1 and Bretteville and that sort of thing. So luckily for the 30 troops of the Royal Montreal Regiment, they participated in a relatively benign initial battle, and then as a company during the capture of Calais, you can see I've highlighted one of the arrows there. The red one is where the Regina Rifles were at the very end of the Battle of Calais. If you recall, we sort of pushed into Calais, but we're trying to convince the Germans there to surrender. Because we didn't want to fight through the city itself, so we basically isolated it, cut it off, surrounded it, pounded it, and about the 1st of October, the Germans actually surrendered just as one company of their Regina Rifles was moving in from the south, and the rest of the battalion was clearing these defended areas to the west of the city. So once again, very few casualties. I think there's 3 or 4 casualties in the company during this battle. So all in all, a relatively positive first experience with the Regina Rifles. And the Regina Rifles, have some respect for the RMR. They're not just parade ground soldiers. They can actually do the job.
Right.
And this company is commanded by Major Lowe again, and has Captain Schwab is the company 2IC and 2 lieutenants in the company with sergeants commanding the other platoon. So they go through the Cap Gris and Calais battles, and then stay with the Regina Rifles for the next phase of the operation. And this is where this is sort of pre-Scheldt, if you like, or almost co-Scheldt, to the Battle of the Scheldt. And it was just an overview of, if you've seen this map all week, as we've seen this map, you can sort of see where this is all taking place. This is all Leopold Canal down here on the bottom left, where the 3rd Canadian Division crosses, part of Operation Switchback, which is the clearing of this Breskin Pocket and the Walcheren Peninsula, the Scheldt Estuary. And as Brett, as we explored through the week, this is a job that gets, way more and more importance with fewer and fewer resources, as resources are taken away to feed or protect the Nijmegen salient that has been created by Arnhem. Most of the 1st British Corps, which is over on the right of the picture there, is over on the left, and later on comes back. On the right. Later on comes back to places like Hergenbosch and Roosendaal to clear that side. But for a long time, the fighting forces of the 1st Canadian Army is basically the 2nd Division and the 3rd Division, with the 4th Division sort of in reserve as an armored unit, not a lot of infantry in an area that needs a lot of infantry.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the overall plan, and you can see also a little hook here on the near Bruges at Moorbrugge, where the Algonquins tried to push across in September. If you recall, we're pushing the Germans up and bump into the Scheldt, and we think that the Germans are trying to withdraw, and so we say, well, we'll just bounce across this double canal at Moorbrugge, but that goes very poorly. And yesterday, Philip sort of showed that battle and the challenges of it. So when later on, about 2 weeks later, when the 3rd Division is now preparing for this, they are across the Canal de la Derivision de la Lys, and they only have one canal now, the Leopold Canal, to cross, instead of 2 parallel canals. So General Surprise plan, as we know, is to attack on the south, draw the enemy in from the south, and then move the 9th Brigade across from Terneuzen and catch the Germans from behind. Now, we talked about this, I think, earlier about the 15th Army and the withdrawal of the Germans. Well, right now, you've got 2 divisions left holding fortresses, as they're called, Fortress Breskins and Fortress Walcheren. The 64th Division in the Breskins area, and the 71st Division in Walcheren and South Beveland, with a bunch of other odds and sods, if you like, of the German Army, Parish Camp Chill, and other organizations. But still a fairly large organization. 64th Division has about 10, 11,000, 12,000 troops, and the same or more guns than the Canadians have in defending. So we're assaulting at best 1-to-1 odds. The Germans have 3 regiments deployed along the canal, and we're attacking with 1 brigade. So it's a tough order for anybody to do this, but the plan now in the 7th Brigade, and I'll see if I can next slide here. I'll just show you some of the terrain at the Leopold Canal. You know, there's a picture of the Leopold Canal. In the top right, the Germans dug in either along the sides or on top, camouflaged into to sweep the polder land. And then on the left, you can see the flooded land just north of where the Canadians cross. Canadians cross down at the bottom. You can see there's a little block that's actually a bunker, and the area between that bunker and the flooded land to the north is only about 400 meters, and that's the only not completely sodden land around there. But to north of that, it's basically ankle to knee-deep water in the fields. Restricting the Germans for sure, but also making very miserable battle for the infantry. So the 7th Brigade plan is to cross 2. A little deep detour then. Go back to across 2 battalions across the canal. The Regina Rifles on one side and the Winnipeg Rifles on the right, up a little bit further down the river. Link up the bridgeheads, pass the Canadian Scottish through the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, and move on and capture the town of Ada, which is that sort of crossroads in the northwest corner of the photo there, and move on to Ardenburg, which is off the map, off the photo to the left. So that's the plan for the battle. It's supposed to happen between the 6th and the 7th and 8th of October. As it turns out, as we know, if you read the history, it's much different from in the actuality. So I wouldn't be a gunner if I didn't talk a little bit about the fire plan to support this attack.
I was not surprised to see that in the slides at all when you sent them to me. I'd be kind of disappointed if they weren't, to be honest.
Yeah, you don't see the presentation about the infantry. You've got to have some pictures of guns.
Well, yeah, of course.
So just a quick review of what the fire support is. It is quite extensive to support a 1 brigade attack, and certainly a surprising number of very heavy guns supporting this attack.
Yeah.
So 327 guns supporting the attack, which you see the various organizations supported by the Newfoundlanders in heavy regiments. But you can see 128 5-inch guns, 64 7.2-inch guns, and 3 of the super heavy guns from the 3rd Super Heavy Regiment, which are parsed out in 1s and 2s across the 21st Army Group front. The shell of the 240 millimeter howitzer weighed about 250 pounds. So heavy stuff, mainly for counter battery, and then the 25 pounders, either towed or self-propelled, to support the infantry. But by this time, and there's an excellent article in Canadian military history about the counter battery plan for the Battle of the Scheldt, and shows the difficulty that they had because of the very flat terrain. So flash spotting was very hard because you couldn't get above the guns to see them. So sound ranging became the way that they found these guns, but it was very challenging, and the soddenness, the wetness of the ground, also impeded the effect of the explosion, and so they had a lot of predictive fire, which is not the most accurate. And so the best they could provide as guarantees, if you like, to the infantry is we could get the guns to stop firing, but it was very difficult to destroy them. So what they do in this fire plan is they have an hour of concentrations on known and suspected German positions. Then they sort of, while the Germans are firing back, expecting us to attack, they try and track down where they are. Then they pound those artillery positions, and then just before they attack, 15 minutes of heavy concentrations on the canal. So that's the fire plan part of it. And there are FOOs with the advancing infantry that go forward from, in this case, from the 12th Field Regiment to go with the RMR. So, so this is the battlefield as it happens on the day. There's a couple of explanatory pictures. They cross in the collapsible storm boats, which you can see there being manhandled forward. Their plan, there's about 3 boats per platoon, and they're paddled, if you like, by men from the North Shore regiments. They don't have to paddle their own boats because the boats have to go back and forth carrying wounded. So the North Shore regiment soldiers are there to take the boats across, bring them back, bring us following waves, and also evacuate casualties. And of course, the 27 Wasp flamethrowers that are used to support the attack. This photo is from the practice that they did at another canal.
Yep.
But they lined up 27 Wasps and basically flamed for 5 minutes until the tanks were empty at each of the crossing sites where the Regina Rifles or the Cannon Scots were gonna cross. And you can see on the map there where the 2 crossings are, at Moorhuizen and at Moorsholt and Oosthoek. The Cannon Scots and the Reginas go across, and the Winnipeg Rifles were to be fed in through the Reginas, but they ended up being fed through the Cannon Scots. I got my regiments mixed up there a little area. So this annotated map here on the left shows what was where the Royal Montreal Regiment company was crossing. And what happened on the 5th of May, so the day before the attack, the regiment, or the regiment, including the Royal Montreal Regiment, moves forward to a town called Cliet, about 6 kilometers from the canal. Then there's what's called an R group, a recce group. So Colonel Matheson and his company commanders, Major Lowe and Captain Schwab, go forward and take a look at the ground. Very challenging because you can't really stick your head too far up above the canal without getting shot at. And so they don't really get a chance. They can see the condition of the ground on the south side of the canal, but it's challenging to get a good idea of what it's like on the north side. So for this battle, as it was much of the case in Normandy, there's some soldiers are LOB, left out of battle. So you don't have, if your unit's destroyed, you have a sort of something to build it up on, to rebuild the unit if it takes heavy casualties. So for this battle, Major Lowe and one of the lieutenants, one of the 2 lieutenants, is left out of battle with about 15 or 20 soldiers out of the about 80 to 90 that were in the company. Excuse me. So Captain Schwab is the company commander for the day, and he has one other officer, Lieutenant Barclay, who's his company 2IC, a second in command. All of the platoons are commanded by sergeants who are going forward. So after they do their reconnaissance, they decide on have a whole group, an orders group, decide give the plan. So they're going to go. The Reginas are going to go 2 companies up, with A company of the Reginas on the right and the RMR company on the left. So this will be their first real frontline assault as a member of the Regina Rifles. They're going to cross in assault boats, as I said. So those assault boats that are pictured in the photo. And then what is supposed to happen is after they land, as you can see the crossing sites on the photo, they're supposed to go left to the road and move up along that road to Ardenburg through Ada. That's the plan. So at 23:30, so 30 minutes before midnight, they start moving up to their forming up place just behind the canal. And it takes them about 3 hours to walk that 6 kilometers, and they get their boats organized, get the people assigned into boats, meet with their paddlers. This is all, of course, happening at night. When they get there to the forming up place, they're not 100% sure of where they are and where the canal is. So Lieutenant Barclay goes off by himself, goes forward to make sure that the route that has been indicated is the real route. And so he moves forward, goes up to the canal, says, okay, this is the right spot, comes back, and he brings the company forward at about 4:50 in the morning. So still dark just before, this is October, so the sun's getting up a little later, as we know, it's still dark. So at 5:25, of course, the fire plan started at 3:30, so the guns are firing throughout this whole time, pounding the German positions in depth initially, then counter battery, and then from about 15 minutes before they're going to cross, so 5:15, they start pounding the near bank or the far bank of the canal. At 5:25, the flamethrowers start, so lights up the night and pours flame across the canal. It runs down into the German positions or onto the German positions and hopefully wipes them out. As it turns out, it doesn't, but it does certainly cause some confusion and casualties. And at 5:30, which is at the appointed time, the two platoons of the Royal Montreal Regiment cross. So they push the boats up the bank, down the far bank, and start paddling across the Leopold Canal. A short trip, but still not one I would want to make. The canal's about 60 to 80 meters wide at this point. And as soon as they hit the water, the Germans start firing back at them. There's machine gun fire instantly. Number 3 platoon, commanded by Sergeant Craddock, it actually is pretty much unscathed by a miracle. Gets across the canal on the left and disembarks from their boats. The boats go back to get the next wave, and they're sort of assembled right around where the leftmost arrow on the photo is, at that sort of junction of a trail and the canal, is where 3 platoon ends up. First platoon, however, is not so lucky. First platoon is hit in the water by cross-firing MG-42s, firing from that bunker you can see on the photo and from further down on the right. They said they get in a cone of fire across the 3 boats, so the 4 boats of the platoon. Sergeant Murray is killed. 2 of the boats are destroyed and sink in the canal, and there's many casualties. So 1 platoon is pretty much wiped out or made non-functioning organizations. Individual soldiers get across the canal, but they sort of merge with other organizations. Schwab is with 3 platoon, fortunately. He's the company commander. He goes with the lead boats. And so he is on the other side, as is his foo. However, the foo typically, I don't know how many stories I read about the Second World War, the radios don't work as soon as they cross the river.
Every time.
So they're not able to call in any extra artillery. The artillery has pounded away, but is now on call to everybody. So on the south bank, so they're basically getting organized on the north bank. They sort of got across. Okay, we're here. They're taking fire from the front, and from down the canal, from that German bunker and from other positions, and from the town of Grafjan. You can see up about 400 meters away. So you can imagine at night the tracer fire is stitching across their positions here. The Germans can't see exactly where they are, but they know where they've crossed. And at the same time, of course, further down the river, the Canadian Scottish are crossing, and they have much greater success getting across the river. So their bridgehead starts to expand a little bit more. They have less ground in which to expand. Their bridgehead is very narrow, but they do get their companies across in relatively good order. So Lieutenant Barclay, who's on the south side, sees the wreck of number one platoon, sees the sunken boats and the soldiers sort of dragging themselves out of the water on the south side and some on the north side. So he immediately takes the 3rd platoon, number 2 platoon in this case, across the canal. And so he gets in the boats, leads them across. They also get across relatively unscathed, except for Lieutenant Barclay, who, as soon as he tops the canal, takes a bullet right in the forehead and is killed. So he's the only casualty of that in that platoon as they cross the river, across the canal. Interestingly, as a sidebar, Lieutenant Barclay is the only Royal Montreal Regiment officer to be killed in the Second World War.
Oh.
So as by their role, but other officers who moved to other units were killed in their new organizations, most notably their former CO, Lieutenant Colonel T.C. Lewis, when he was acting as the brigade commander of 8th Brigade, drove over a mine on the 17th of October and was killed.
Right.
And he's buried in Adigam Cemetery. So there are RMR officers or former RMR officers who die in their new positions, but Barclay is the one and only RMR officer who's killed in the war. And I actually was my going away present to the RMR when I left the Montreal garrison was a picture of his grave and an inscription about him that hangs in the mess in Montreal. So the company then is assembled at the bank, and let's see if these animations work. Oh, there we go. We're zoomed in a bit
There
to
we go.
where the action is. And so the company is basically assembled here at the junction of this trail and where they cross the river on the left-hand side of the company area. And so Sergeant Craddock, his job in this, his task in this attack was to move forward, sort of halfway down that trail, and then turn to the west, to the left, and go and cut the Ardeberg Road as the other platoons moved along the canal. So Craddock, who's, as you recall, his platoon was relatively unscathed getting across. So he sets off about 150 meters and hooks to the left to try and drive towards the canal. And basically, for the rest of the battle, they're never heard from again. What happens to them is only deciphered afterwards. And I'll read something from a letter Craddock wrote that tells the story of what happened to that platoon as it set off directly towards the Germans and then cut across these fields to try and get to the road. So Sergeant Hayward, with 1 and 2 platoons, sort of the remnants of the 2 platoons together, they're supposed to now push along the bank. So they set out down the bank. It's about 300 meters from where they start to where that German bunker is. And they start moving forward and basically reducing the German positions trench by trench by trench. Because what the defending Germans have done is not only dug along the canal, the top of the canal, the sort of the reverse lip of the canal, they've also dug positions perpendicular to the canal. Expecting to be rolled up. So there are defended positions already in place for the Germans to stop and advance down the canal, either to the left or the right. So they start running into these, and it's a very, very slow, methodical, grenade and Sten gun and rifle and bayonet advance for those 300 meters. So as Hayward tries to push along the canal, he runs into them. The bunker is still spraying them with fire and hitting anybody trying to get across. Most of the men in that platoon as they advance are wounded one way or the other, either likely or seriously wounded as they move down toward. They don't get to the bunker, but they push on towards it. This is now that we're into the morning now. The sun has come up. This is now around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. The remnants back at the company headquarters, which is still back at the original point, is now counterattacked. So what happens now is the Germans now have figured out where we are across the Leopold Canal, and now start to launch incessant counterattacks against these very small bridgeheads. You can see they're only 50 to 60 meters from the canal, dug in and trying to hold it. And now the counterattacks start. So basically everyone who's there is involved in fighting, of course. Once again, almost everyone in the company headquarters is wounded one way or the other. The Fou, who's a Lieutenant Gamelin from the 12th Regiment, so he doesn't have his own radio, but the radio from the company radio starts to work again. So he's able to call for fire. So there's defensive fires being fired on the Germans as they attack, as they form up. They tend to form up in Hafjian across the fields there, move down through the fields. So there's opportunities to shell them as they come forward. But there are desperate hand-to-hand fights at the company headquarters as the Germans try to attack. And of course, the Sergeant Craddock and his platoon still haven't heard anything from them in the last 3 or 4 hours. So Schwab, who's up forward with 1 and 2 platoon, he sees that he's the only unwounded person in that group who are still fighting against these counterattacks. And he's sort of said, there's no way we can get any further along here. We're stuck. So what they see and hear is on the south bank of the canal, they start seeing people trying to get their attention, yelling at them, and it's D Company of the Regina Rifles. They're about to cross behind the German bunker anyway, to try and outflank it. So Schwab mentions this is a very heartening sight, a very great sight for them as they saw that they were going to get some help. So D Company crosses the canal in their boats, about 12 boats, to get behind the German positions. Of course, there are German positions all along the canal in various spaces, but certainly try and knock out this bunker. So they do that, but as they cross, getting fired, and as they assault this bunker, D Company is reduced to 20 men from about 80.
Wow. Wow.
As they make this one attack across the river. So basically, Schwab, who's seeing this happening, and if you go to that bunker today, you can see the Piat impact on the side of the bunker.
Wow.
That is probably one of the shells that took it out. So they fire Piats at it and knock out the bunker and clear that area up to where D Company has crossed. But it cost D Company an enormous amount of casualties to do that. All through this, through the regimental history, there are people, they're trying to evacuate their wounded, and they send some soldiers back to try and get stretcher bearers to come forward. Most of them are killed trying to do that. And so the wounded are still there with them. And there are other soldiers sent back to get more Piat bombs, because they're using these Piats as sort of assault grenades to shoot into these trenches. So they're running out of them. There are no tanks to be seen here. This is not tank country by any means. And so those soldiers going back and forth trying to bring up more Piat bombs to support the 20 or 30 soldiers that are left with Schwab, or probably around 20, and the 20 soldiers of D Company. So Schwab is organizing the defense. He's basically later given command of this little group of 2 companies. And there's a Corporal Thomas who was wounded very early on in the fight as he moved forward. And Corporal Thomas he's trying to get Corporal Thomas evacuated, but unfortunately he dies of his wounds on the north bank as he waits. So the company is then it's around noon now, so it's 6.5 hours since they crossed. Still no news of Craddock. Schwab is put in charge of the whole organization on this side of the Regiment Rifle, and they spend the remainder of the day waiting for counterattacks. 1400 hours, the first major counterattacks start coming in on the front, and they're basically there. This is the 6th of October. They're there for 4 more days, waiting, trying to hold off the German counterattacks. Any idea of pushing forward now is gone. It's just hold on. So they're holding on at the original company position. They're holding on in the area of the German bunker. And counterattack after counterattack is coming into their position. And the same experience is being held by C Company of the Regiment Rifles that goes across further down the river. So a few RMRs now start to move, it's like replacements or reinforcements. They're really guys who got separated from their companies in the night and in the struggle, and now coming back, so their strength sort of goes up a little bit. But Schwab is around the end of the day on the 6th. There's Schwab and 11 guys left in this and so Masson sends over word that he's in charge, if you like, of whatever's left up there. Congratulations, you're in charge of a 40-man. Half the battalion is now 40 men. And so they basically hold on there against these incessant counterattacks. And what's happening now is Brigadier Sprague, who is the commander of 7th Infantry Brigade, is reassessing his plan. Because his original plan was to put the Royal Winnipeg Rifles through this bridgehead where the Regina Rifles are, because it's closest to their objective of Ardenburg. But the reality is there's nowhere to put them, and there's no way to get across. So instead, he decides to put the Winnipeg Rifles across at the Canscott bridgehead and have them drive down the canal. So on the 8th and 9th of October, so this is 2 days later. And imagine sitting there for 2 more nights, and days and nights, holding these positions against German counterattacks that come every few hours. They're under constant mortar shelling and trying to call down fire on their own artillery to support them. So the Royal Winnipeg Rifles get across in the Canscott bridgehead area down to the east and start to move down the canal to the west to try and link up these 2 bridgeheads. So But what is happening is the Germans, the 64th Division, is sending all of their reserves against this bridge. They're trying to crush it to push us back across the canal, similar to what happened at Moorbrugge back in September with the Algonquin Regiment.
Yeah.
And so they're committing their reserves here. They're pushing forward and waiting as we know, the 9th Brigade is going to come in behind them. And so they're sort of playing into our plan, but it's the 7th Brigade that has to bear the brunt of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're the ones that have to suffer so that the division plan, if you like, works. And it does work extremely well, actually.
Yep.
So
can I just ask a quick question here? I'll also give you a bit of a breather.
yeah, I've been talking pretty straight here. I mean, I can't see the sidebar, unfortunately, with it. So if there are any questions?
Yeah, we'll do some now. This one's an interesting one because I was thinking the same. The Piats, were they? I assume for the bunker they're using a direct fire role. But the Piat could be used as a mortar. Is there any detail about what they're doing with them at this point?
Not that I've seen in what I've read about what they're using it. They could sort of fire it, sort of like a little mini 2-inch mortar, if you like.
Yeah.
But in this case, I think from where you see the impact strikes on the bunker there, right against the flat side, and so I'm sure they were being used in a direct fire way to shoot at, certainly at the apertures, the machine gun apertures in the bunker is what they were trying to close up. But I can imagine they were using them. They didn't have those fancy multi-Piat mortars that you see the pictures of, but yeah, you could fire them. They had an indirect sight, right, or a sight where you could fire them at longer range.
Yeah, I was just thinking because it might matter depending on how many they got across in that second resupply they were talking about there, which would make the difference. Yeah, but again, like you said, the German counter, as is their doctrine, is constant to keep pushing them back. Again, plays right into the hands of the plan overall, but I assume if there was any left, they would have used them up pretty quickly if they were using them in that role. And this one's more of kind of a speculative. I know Mike discussed air power. Perfect, not perfect, very well, extremely well. Nothing's perfect in history, but I have the mind of this that saying bombing up one bunker is almost impossible. It's not easy. Would be
especially at the proximity that our soldiers are to that bunker. Even a 250-pound bomb gone astray would have wiped them out. So that's a bit too close, even for the best of the bomb-foons. And by the way, happy birthday to Mike Beckfield if he's out there, but it is his birthday today. Oh,
it's his birthday. Yeah, I think he's in Sudbury today.
There you go. As Mike explained there yesterday, the weather is not in favor of what's going on here. And when there is good weather, the aircraft tend to be striking the depth positions and those gun positions that have been identified.
Right.
Hitting them to try and knock out the German guns. Because there are some even coastal guns firing from Kapstadt that are firing at this. So they've turned them a few around, not a lot of them. But certainly mortars and artillery are in abundance, and the Germans have lots of ammunition. It's all been left behind by the 15th Army as it retreated. So
here's another question, actually, right from gunner to gunner here about the water in the ground again, because there's been discussion of that throughout the week about sometimes it makes the munitions firing ineffective. Is there any discussion of that from either side? So from the Allied side and then also from the fire they're taking?
Yeah, once again, I didn't see any specific mention of it, but you're right, is that soft ground will lessen the impact of PD fuses, or it'll go a little bit into the ground.
Yeah.
Whether they're firing time fuses and airburst as much as they can, I would imagine they're doing that as well. But the wet sodden ground will reduce the effectiveness of all the indirect fire from German and Canadian. Yeah. Which is lucky when we're receiving it, but not so lucky when we're sending it.
Yeah, it's just so funny. Just jump in there again, give you another breather for a second. But you're mentioning, right, that, and maybe to me, I can't remember if you mentioned at the beginning, but the detail of the war diary, because the things they're recording, because they have the time. Now they're in combat, right? Those things get lost. They're not recorded until later. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's one of those things. You get those wealth of resources, and then when it's one of the things we want to talk about, then they go away. But that's to be expected, because that's how it always happens.
Yeah, the article in Canadian Military History is talking specifically about the polder or the flat ground being a very challenging place to do counter battery fire.
Right.
And how they're as a result relying on a lot of what's called predicted fire. In other words, just where we're picking targets off the map and we can't actually observe the fire being put down because it's very because of the weather and also because of the danger to aerial spotters, because there's a lot of anti-aircraft guns in this area too.
Yes.
So they're not able to get air observation out there as much as they would like for those two reasons.
Yep.
And those ROP guys who are amazing, amazing people when you meet them, gunners who are taught to fly, because as I've said in a few comments, it was considered easier to teach a gunner to fly than it was to teach a pilot how to shoot. Yep. So they all by themselves in their Auster aircraft are manning a radio, adjusting fire, and flying a plane all at the same time. So they were very good at multitasking.
Oh yeah.
But they really couldn't fly over the enemy area.
Yeah.
Right? They're in little tiny planes. So
yeah, they're not big at all.
so they're looking in from a distance, or they're as one pilot explained to me, he would fly at very, very low level, very fast towards the front. And then as he got, and pretend to be a pilot here and use my hands, but as he got to the front, he would go straight up in a climb, roll over and look at the target as the shell landed, and then come back and then send the correction.
That's one way to do it.
So his head was on a swivel there. It was because he would hear that the splash. It was going to land in 5 seconds. The round was going to land in 5 seconds. So he'd be ready to be up there at the apex of his climb, flip over on his back, look down to where he thinks the target's going to land, the round's going to land, and then give a correction based on that as he flew back towards back over his own line. So just an amazing skill level of these ROP pilots.
Jeez, he must have been pretty flexible. I mean, I hurt my neck trying to change lane.
His head was definitely on a swivel.
Oh yeah,
so that kind of stuff is. But the problem is you got to have weather good enough to do that. Yeah. And that's a challenge throughout this whole campaign, really, in the show. Yeah. Is the cloud and rain and bad weather.
It's just wet.
So what's going on with Sergeant Craddock and this sort of left hook that I got on the map here? So they moved off down that road, if you like, a trail with trees on it, and then made their left hook and headed across the fields. And what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, just read a little bit from the letter that he wrote.
Yes, please do.
To his company commander when he was in the hospital, because he ended up, we'll find out, he ends up being wounded and captured, but then the hospital where he's staying with the Germans is then liberated by the Canadians, and he's returned to our lines. So let's start here. So soon after moving off from company headquarters, we came under fire from machine guns and snipers, using a fire section with Sergeant Turner to give covering fire while the rest of us moved on. In the meantime, we had been joined by about 5 men from number 1 platoon. So these are guys who got massacred before and ended up joining up with him. They remained with us. We proceeded with 2 sections and came under more machine gun fire. Corporal Finley was hit at that time. He was wounded in 3 places. The medical orderly attended to him and said that he thought he was finished. For a few minutes, we were pinned down by this machine gun. Doubled the section from this spot to another field directly behind. At this stage, we arrived on a dirt road, which I think is this dirt road that goes sort of diagonal across the field. With a ditch on either side. Proceeded along this road in the direction of some houses, which are probably the houses at the end of this road here, or a farm in the middle. Came under fire from snipers directly ahead. Took cover in a ditch and started to crawl towards the house about 500 yards away, which is why I'm thinking that they're the ones at the crossroads here. The enemy now had us really pinpointed, and things got pretty hot, with fire coming from our front, from the left, and also from the rear. We did considerable crawling, got about 200 yards from the houses. Could not use the Bren guns. They both got jammed with mud. At this stage, I was wounded by a grenade. Jerry had gotten into the ditch on the opposite side of the road. Private Martin was killed next with a bullet in the head. Jerry was tossing grenades, and the machine gun from the rear was giving it to us. Private Taylor was the next hit with a bullet in the shoulder. We threw some grenades and seemed to have chased Jerry from the other side of the road. Private Barrick was now hit, severe wound in the hand was nearly off. Corporal Wishart was next wounded, then got another one and was killed. They were picking us off pretty rapidly, and the situation was hopeless. I decided we would have to give up. I was in severe pain, but was clear of mind when I made the decision. From information since received from Private Kenyon, who was brought to a hospital with a shattered elbow, seems that the fire section we left behind to cover our advance was also attacked by Jerry and captured or knocked out. Sergeant Turner was wounded and taken prisoner. Lance Corporal Boyer was captured. Also captured Privates Fife, McCool, Anderson, Estelle, and Taylor. Corporal Finley and Corporal Thibault, both wounded, were captured and been sent to hospitals in Germany. Continuing, Sergeant Craddock reportedly had no knowledge of what had happened to the other 9 men of his platoon. Of these, later reports showed that 2 had been wounded and that Private Kaplan, while attempting to carry orders from Sergeant Turner's section, had come forward and been killed by enemy fire. Concluding his reports, Sergeant Craddock wrote, "The platoon put up a good show, and it's as it possibly could, sir. Jerry had us isolated. We did our best." He then gives special mention to our medical orderly, Gordon Ashby of the 1st Battalion, the Regina Rifle. He was very capable under fire, did not hesitate to crawl out under fire to fix our wounded. During our 20-day stay in hospital, he worked hard looking after 8 of us Canadians. Things were made much easier by him during our stay. So that's what happened to the lost platoon of Sergeant Craddock. They headed off into the night and were never heard from again. So on the 9th, the 8th at 8 o'clock, Colonel Masson meets up with the company commanders and gives particular praise to their RMR for what they've done. But on the 10th, on the 10th is when the Winnipeg Rifles move through and sort of relieve them and then push onto the road around where the old bridge was at Strooibrug. So at this point, the Winnipeg Rifles have moved through and relieved them. So the Regina Rifle, the RMR and the Regina Rifles are moved back across the river on the 10th of October. One section did stay with D Company of the Reginas, but the remainder of the RMR moved out, and then B Company of the Reginas comes back to take up its old job. So in that fight on the river, there was 6 killed, 35 wounded, and 21 missing in that one company of about 80 to start the whole battle with. So quite a hit. Of course, they have about 15 LOBs who take over, Major Lowe. Captain Schwab is not wounded through this whole process. As the company commander, he goes back to his job and later commands the company. The dead, the RMR dead from this battle are all buried in Adigum Cemetery, which is just south of this area there in Belgium, near Maldegem and Adigum. So a bitter and costly fight for the RMR, one that they played an important role in. Schwab earns a military cross for his action in this battle, which it was well deserved. I think there were 3 other military medals awarded to various NCOs in the company. So they go back to their old job, if you like. So back to Army headquarters, and it turns out they end up guarding both the commanders of the 2 divisions that are fighting in the Scheldt. So the commander of the 64th, Everding, and the commander of the 70th, Dazer, Dazer, I guess, if he's German, both came through to 1st Canadian Army headquarters, which is, I suppose because they were generals, but I know Carrera did not have any love of Germans, so I don't know whether they wanted to talk to them or just wanted to see who they were.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I've never thought of it. It makes sense, I guess, in a way, but also in Crear, it also doesn't make sense. I don't know what he was doing, because it's not like he's going to get any intelligence from this. He literally run into land. There's no weapon left.
It's not like he would be congratulating them on a good defense.
No.
Crerar was not as we know by his order that no Canadians would be buried, no Canadian Army soldiers would be buried in Germany.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe one day yell at them. I don't know.
So I don't know if his biography mentions these incidents at all, but apparently Everding was a real piece of work, apparently, and was still an ardent Nazi. And the quote from the diary or the history says that Everding, as he left, favored the company with a Nazi salute, quite as genteel as could reasonably have been expected. So,
Of course.
So I'm not sure if it was a tongue-in-cheek there what he did, but apparently Dazer was much more of a nicer guy, if you like, from the point of view of the RMR. Anyway, he was much more cooperative and less upset to be captured, perhaps.
Yeah,
after having been given the impossible task of holding off the entire Canadian Army.
Yeah.
So that's part of their role. As I said, Schwab ends up with the Military Cross, and then later on, at the end of the war, in terms of, it's an interesting regimental history because you do get these little snapshots of people going through, but they end up guarding Seyss-Inquart from the Netherlands, the German Gauleiter or Reich commander in the Netherlands.
Oh yeah, I guess they would have. Yeah.
So it was 6 1/4, as he was known as. That's what they used to write on graffiti on the side of buildings. The Dutch resistance would write the number 6 1/4, which was Seyss-Inquart, his name. And so he comes to 1st Canadian Army headquarters as well at the end of the war, and the RMR talk about they have a big challenge, not preventing him from being lynched by the Dutch. Because they're in at that point they're up near Utrecht, I think, is where the headquarters is.
Yeah.
And so the people of Utrecht were some of the people who had the worst experiences in the Hunger Winter.
Hunger Winter, especially, yeah.
And with the lack of food, and so they talk about a farmer came to them at the headquarters once it was known that Seyss-Inquart was there, and he said, "I'll give you 200 eggs for him." So eggs being very, very fresh eggs being a very valuable commodity in the bartering network.
Oh yeah.
They said they were tempted, but they ended up not doing it. But they had to be very careful to whom they handed over Seyss-Inquart. Eventually, he was, tried as a war criminal and hanged. But it was touch and go there at 1st Canadian Army headquarters to keep him whole in order that he could meet his reward or be judged, because there were obviously a lot of Dutch people who were not happy with him.
Oh yeah, big time.
So that's a little story from the war, from the Battle of the Scheldt, and I think it's sort of, I would say, unique, but it's a little sidebar of one unit that had a very unusual path through the Second World War.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's because, again, just trying to draw threads, I think naturally happens when you do a theme week like this, but it seems that it's a common story, unfortunately, for this battle. Did we get all the slides? Oh no, hold on, I'll bring that back one up here.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot
a couple more things. That's the actual bunker that's still there.
Yeah, that's
on
really
the canal. You can see the damage from the Piat.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I'm not sure if I have any other. There's just a map and map again. Sorry, and and that's the square in Ada, the town they were headed for.
Right.
It's now the memorial to the 7th Brigade, and there's no mention of the Royal Montreal Regiment there, but.
Well, I mean, they're not even included on the map, so I guess you can't really expect it.
Yeah, and so that's also the place. It's well known. You can see the picture in the back there. That's where Queen Wilhelmina came back to the Netherlands, or Queen Juliana, sorry, came back to the Netherlands. That was where she first regained Dutch territory. It was in Ada in late 1944. So there was a big parade there, a ceremony, and that's a photograph that marks that event. Anyway, so sorry to interrupt, but yeah, it's
no. It's great. I totally forgot about the bunker picture and this. This is great to always see the commemorations. I'm never going to be mad about seeing a picture of a UC. So thanks for sharing that. Laura's Lally just says hi. She joined us a few minutes ago. It's kind of back to what I was saying. Yeah, that's a great picture. So thanks for sharing that with us. But it's something, drawing again, like I said, thread through all this, because it's hard not to. That's what they train me to do, right, as a PhD. But it seems common in that way of the horribleness, right? High casualty rate, especially, like that's a massive casualty rate for a small operation, but it's not unusual for the Scheldt, which is unfortunate. But it's just it's fascinating that they are. How do I say this? It's again because they're not in the line much, right? As we've learned, right? They're at Calais and Cape Grenade, but they're taking the same number of casualties that units have been fighting since Normandy. So I don't know kind of what the conclusion is there, but to me, it's not a reflection, I don't think, on the Canadian Army specifically. I think it's just this fighting is difficult for the things we already discussed.
Yeah, I mean, we often hear a narrative, and the Regiment Rifles, of course, have the highest casualty in the brigade. They have 280 casualties in this battle.
Yeah.
You hear about, they're all replacements and truck drivers and clerks, and they haven't, they haven't been trained properly. Well, the RMR have been training almost exclusively for this battle. So they are, yes, they have other roles, but they're not replacements. They're guys who volunteered in 1939 and have been training ever since. So, and still, it's when you're going up against machine guns and mortars in flat sodden ground, it shows, to a certain extent, it's not about, it's about surviving, really.
More or less. But yeah, again, there's just so many stories of that, from everything from the causeway to this, to the canal, some parts of the Breskins Pocket. It's just, sometimes we're talking about, I think it was yesterday, it's just luck sometimes. That's it. There's not much else to it. And again, that's just what I think about the Scheldt. If you don't have to run, I just have a few questions for you, if that's all right.
Sure.
So, because like you said, you knew many of the veterans of this. Were they, because again, not to be in a mean way, but they're not involved in much direct combat. Were they upset kind of this sort of exclusion that we've seen, the maps, that kind of thing? Were they upset by this? Did they expect that because it was a small contribution in a much bigger operations, that kind of thing? Or
they, well, the ones I met Captain Schwab. Once didn't really, of course, you wish you knew him. You usually met him when you knew everything you knew now. But
yeah, right.
So he was talking about this, and I had to go back and read about it. But by and large, from my understanding, talking to RMR, serving RMR, and whatever, this is sort of their this is their moment of glory in the Second World War, if you like, and so they're very proud of it. They barely survived being completely disbanded. It was only through political machinations back in Canada that got them this role in the first place. Otherwise, it would have been a Lawrence Scott company we were talking about here.
Yeah.
So I think they're proud of what they did. They share a city and a garrison with the Black Watch, who have lots of stories in both wars.
Yep.
But I think they're I would say whether they're in hindsight, the guy, a veteran who says, well, I was in the headquarters defense battalion or company, therefore I survived, right? When a lot of guys didn't. Whereas, here they had that one battle where a lot of them did have bad experience.
Yeah, I think
if you compare the number of Lawrence Scott dead,
yes,
who were in every division and corps headquarters as the headquarters defense platoons, to I think the RMR have more dead than all of them put together.
Yeah, because again, I think it's just that we're talking about that roll of the dice because of the conditions.
Right. And if you take out the accidental deaths and the traffic accidents and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me that that's how this goes. And it's sad, but it's so interesting because, again, like it's been talked throughout the week, and developments of doctrine and learning and how most of that has to get thrown out the window. To me is utterly fascinating, and kind of sums up the Scheldt a lot for me in a lot of ways. Right. It seems almost, again, not in them not learning kind of way, because again, what they had learned doesn't apply. It's almost in this World War I kind of more fixed, static, and having to learn again about what's the best way to deal with these things and limited space. I mean, just the Scheldt specifically, because of wet, limited space, fixed lines, defenses. It's just can't not go there. I think that's a natural kind of thing to think about for this.
Yeah, and you don't have a lot of extra troops, really, right? There's only the 3rd Division has 2 of its brigades committed. The 8th Brigade sort of don't decide where it's going to go yet, but there's not a lot behind that. There's not a lot of depth in the Canadian Army or the 2nd Canadian Corps anyway at this point. Because they're also still, they're about to hand off Dunkirk to the Dutch and Czechs and all that. So there's still it's the amazing sort of long straggling battles along the coast that the 2nd Corps has to deal with. And as I said, the 1st Canadian Army headquarters is in Ghent while they're still fighting back at Calais and Cap Gris-Nez. So it's amazing lines of communication. And,
Yeah, that doesn't get talked about much at all. It's just the spread out nature and how distant that distance it is big. Another question I did have actually, well, I just don't want to forget it, is the Haramara, because afterwards, with how the whole thing goes with First Canadian Army, and are they part of all of that? Or are they sent back earlier? Are they attached somewhere else?
And I just, but I will correct my earlier comment. The Haramara are mentioned on that monument there.
They are. Okay, perfect.
They are there. Yeah, they are. Well, actually, I'm just reading through that earlier. They do go back with the first contingent, with the first division.
Oh, okay.
Because they came back, they came over with the first division.
Right.
Who came over just after the first contingent. So they're all very, very happy that they go home early, because most of them because they because they didn't have a lot of fighting before this one big fight. Most of their people are original 1939 soldiers.
Right.
So they have a lot of months built up. So in the winter of 44, 45, they have some soldiers go back to Canada on leave. So they qualify for that because they have enough credits built up, if you like.
Yep.
And it's mainly the first division guys who get that mostly, is the first and second division. But yeah, they do end up coming back home in one of the first drafts coming back.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Excuse me, especially because considering how quickly First Canadian Army at HQ's rounded up too, right? It's wound up.
Right. They get bumped up to a battalion status right at the end of the war, like in April of 45. They get changed from a company to a battalion.
Okay.
So they end up getting a whole bunch of reinforcements and new people in the unit who are drafted in. So they and I'm not sure exactly why that happens.
Yeah, it's odd.
It's to a certain extent, it's a bit of a reward that they're there as a unit again, instead of just a company.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Someone may be planning for post-war responsibilities, may be different or whatever. But it's not really explained very well as to why it happens. It's seen as an honor to the regiment that they regain battalion status. But it's literally for less than a month before the war ends.
That's very interesting. I would have not have guessed that.
Yeah, and everyone wants to get home as fast as they can, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. It's very interesting. Yeah, I wonder why. Yeah, that's really odd. I don't think I have any other questions. I think we've covered all the questions in the sidebars. Let me do a double check here. I think that's all of them. Just everyone's saying they're really enjoying this.
First Canadian Army t-shirt on here as well.
Yeah, I need to get one of those. I keep forgetting.
Project 44. I'll put another plug for them. You can get maps and t-shirts.
Yeah, I'll link it down below. I should have done that earlier. Completely forgot. Yeah, no, I think we're good. Yeah, I don't think I've missed anything. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So thanks for highlighting a unit that doesn't get any attention. I would argue doesn't come up much, unfortunately. But it's really interesting to see how their their experience in this part is so similar. I think that's gonna stick with me from this one, especially. So that's really interesting. So thanks for coming on, David. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great to see you. Great to be here. And
yeah, thank you.
More shows.
Yeah, and Norma's liking your shirt, so I don't know how you.
There you go. You can get Second Canadian Corps if you want. There, we can get your favorite Simmons guy there.
Get Simmons on the back like a hockey sweater.
Or First Canadian Corps. They need to put out the divisional ones. They should put out a bunch of divisional shirts, but. Or Second Canadian Agra, I would certainly buy that one.
Oh yeah, you're not the only one. I've heard other people ask who want that. They want everybody wants everybody. It's so funny. Yeah, it's good. I'm just gonna do a quick sign off by myself, just because it's the end of the week, and then we'll come say goodbye together. Okay?
Sure thing.
So again, thanks everyone for watching. I really enjoyed this week. I hope you did too. And thanks to all my guests coming on this week. You made the week what it is, as you always do. Bringing knowledge, different experiences, different stories. I really appreciate it, and coming across from different. I'm sorry, I'm just seeing Andreas's comment. He's finally figuring out who Dave is. Scheldt. Yeah, that's him. So we talked about why he hasn't changed his name. Anyway, sorry, I keep getting distracted because you guys crack me up. Anyway, so yeah, thanks to the guests. You guys have been amazing. Coming from different areas, getting Robert from the Netherlands was fantastic. So I hope to do more of that in the future and get some more Scheldt stuff just sprinkled in, because I've made some new contacts. Other people have mentioned about possibly wanting to come on talking about it. So maybe we'll just sprinkle them in. So again, can't thank my sponsor enough. The Battlefield Tours. Again, Sam is amazing. She's great. She was on World War II TV quite a long time ago, so you can check that out. Easily find it. She's got an infectious personality of enthusiasm. She's great. So check them out. They're doing a tour, in the new year. Details on their website, and they have a newsletter where they update all that stuff. And just finally, too, if you aren't a patron, please consider it. It does help. Or become a YouTube channel member, just a couple bucks. I think one of the YouTube channel ones is $2. You can do $1 through Patreon, and all that makes a big difference, because it helps me do this. Because again, it's a lot of work to get this going. Especially theme weeks are difficult to organize, just because it's a lot of theme and getting on the same week and everybody together. It's difficult. So please consider that if you can. And also, when you become a patron, you get lots of insights and you kind of influence what I do. So, and by kind of, I mean you definitely do. So check that out as well if you haven't already. So thank you so much. For those of you who are watching who are patrons, again, thank you so much. And Lorelei and all of you. I know Norma, you guys are great supporters. Scott, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And I hope you really enjoyed this week. So thanks again, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Great.
Enjoy you coming on the channel again.
Yeah, I'll come back and talk about maybe talk about artillery again sometime in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, I got some lots of people asking, so maybe we'll
get Dave Grepstead on to talk about the veritable and all that.
Yeah, maybe we can do an arty show or something. I don't know. We'll figure something out. Dave wants to come back again as well, because he's got lots of ideas. He's like me. He's always got lots of ideas. So that's not a bad thing to have. So so we don't have anything scheduled yet. So everyone pay attention on social media and the YouTube community page, see what's going on coming up, and I'll update you once I get some more stuff scheduled up. So other than that, everyone else, enjoy the rest of your Saturday and the rest of your weekend, and I'll see everybody next time. When that will be, we'll find out.
Weekend, everybody.
Yeah, see you, everyone.